Hello everyone, my name is Kirsten Smichael Bailey, and today we will be discussing my evaluation project, which centered on evaluating resident engagement following a resident's transition to Bridgewater. This will be a single case study evaluation presentation. And I just want to explain a little bit before, if you see me looking over, I have notes here. So I'm reading my notes so I can stay, consistent and clear and convey what I have to convey in a timely manner. But yes, let's get into it. So Bridgewater, I want to say before I talk about dementia, Bridgewater is the name of our memory care center in my agency, and it is a locked unit on one floor, which houses individuals typically with mid to late stage dementia who are physically appropriate for assisted living, but cognitively appropriate for more direct and intense care. And so the memory care unit is a type of assisted living level of care, except for there is a primary emphasis on cognitive engagement for these residents with mid to late stage dementia. So I want to talk a little bit about dementia before we dive into the evaluation itself for context. So dementia, as a lot of you may know, is a progressive neurocognitive disorder that affects the memory, reasoning, and daily functioning. Alzheimer's is a very popular type of dementia that we know. And what can happen when a resident has dementia is also behavioral and psychological symptoms that accompany it, or BPSD for short. These symptoms include depression, can include anxiety, apathy, agitation, wandering, social withdrawal. The list goes on. And BPSD has a significant impact on the quality of life of a resident, and it can have significant impact on caregiver burden, which is why Bridgewater is so unique and needed, because it helps to offset that caregiver burden by, your loved one has somewhere to be, that they're going to be saved. It's a locked unit. They cannot wander. They cannot get hurt. But also Bridgewater follows the Hearthstone model, which promotes, it's a model that promotes resident engagement with structure and meaningful activities, and it provides them choices to kind of encompass this whole sense of I'm still here. The resident, even though they have dementia, even though their memory is not what it used to be, their cognition is not what it used to be, they are still there at the center of it all. And through specific engagement, it's possible to bring that out. And so I want to get into the introduction and a brief overview of what this evaluation is going to, cover and talk about. So the project focused on understanding whether or not the Hearthstone model supports resident engagement for individuals living with dementia. And the purpose was to explore how structured and person-centered environments affect participation, especially for residents who have previously shown low engagement, so social withdrawal and things like that. Bridgewater provides daily routines and activities that encourage choice, creativity, and social interaction. And so evaluating this one resident's experience has offered me a little bit more insight into how these structures support and influence the engagement outcomes. So I want to talk about the evaluation question that I aim to answer. So my primary question was, will the resident engagement increase after transition to Bridgewater, after being exposed to this person-centered environment? Right now, the agency, the outcome was not to say whether or not the program was worth continuing to use or not, but specifically for this resident, would it change their BPSD symptoms of social withdrawal and isolation and kind of lethargic behaviors associated with dementia and cognitive decline? And so I decided to do a single A/B case evaluation where I measured the baseline pre-transition and post-transition. I tried to get information for up to 3 weeks pre-transition without any of that structured activity participation, with the resident kind of like, choosing what activities to go to and when, like, available throughout the campus while not in a locked unit. And then the intervention, I tracked engagement for that for about 6 weeks post-transition to Bridgewater. And the data source that I used was a resident tracking sheet that I created with a scale that I devised that from 1 to 5, tracking engagement across the social, physical, verbal, and cognitive domains. So this resident that I decided to follow from my evaluation is a female resident with mid-stage dementia, who previously has shown withdrawal, and she's very quiet and very much keeps to herself, mostly slept throughout the day. If she went down for meals, that would be the only time she kind of socialized, and outside of that, all the other activities across campus, she never bothered to go to. Pre-transition, she kind of was only responding like when you maybe spoke to her if she wanted to, or she was not really actively engaging or participating in things. And so Bridgewater, what it does is they have set activities that they do every day. They plan it out. There's a whole activity calendar of everything that they're going to do day by day and the times. And it's structured to have a routine and to be rooted in also purpose. And so when you get up, you know that, okay, today, I'm going to do something, there's a purpose for the day. And so the goal for the transition that my agency was looking for with this resident particularly is whether or not Bridgewater would prove to be an appropriate move for the resident to help increase that engagement and reduce those BPSD symptoms. So the methods and measurements of my evaluation that I used, like I said, a single A/B evaluation, and the measurement approach was a tracking sheet that I used with a 1 to 5 scale. Basically, the tracking sheet looked like a space for the date, a space for describing the activity, and then a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being minimal passive engagement during the activity, and 5 being active or initiated participation. And I had a staff member from Bridgewater, the activities assistant, do the tracking for me, since I was not going to be able to be on the second floor all the time to monitor whether or not the resident was engaging. And so that staff member was the only one that was tracking the resident engagement that closely in that way. There were some times where, I guess because, and we can get into that at the later date of the discussion, but there were some times where maybe scores were not noted because the activity wasn't part of the structured activity. It was more like an activity the resident was doing on her own, like being out in the garden, and so there are no scores for that. So those were not counted in my data analysis. And then every week is structured, right? And the resident can choose what activities to go to and when. And for the most part, they try to get residents really engaged to go into most or all of the activities. But if if she didn't go to an activity that day, or didn't participate, I just counted that as a zero. Out of the 7 days is a zero for engagement across the board. So that influenced my data as well. And then to analyze the data, I took the weekly mean scores of the calculated each domain, to see if there was a trend in participation, not only just participation alone, yes, her going to activities. I mean, that would have been an obvious, because she wasn't doing that before, but also what areas was she being most engaged in. And so that brings us to this graph that I did of the weekly engagement of the resident. And as you can see, I kind of put 0.1 there just for graphing purposes, so you can see that there was very minimal participation at all previously. When I tell you she did not do anything, she did not do anything. And so you can see that that's kind of all the same for the weeks leading up to the transition week. And the first week, she actually went to a number of activities, which I was surprised. And then you can see that there's a steady trend upward into the 5th and 6th weeks. We have the most participation that we've had so far. And to me, what that says about it is that the combination of a predictable scheduling and with familiar staff, and her probably not having to worry about going down to the dining room from the 7th floor all the way down to the 1st floor for meal times, or going from the 7th floor to the 3rd floor for activities, everything kind of just being on one floor, one level, and her not having to think about engaging as much. I think that helped her feel more comfortable in engaging, and it helped her attend more frequently, especially across the multiple domains. You can see that there is a steady positive trend, a line of best fit of a positive trend upwards. So yeah, like I was saying, the baseline, there was basically no recorded engagement, very minimal participation according to staff reports. I did not, and I will get into this in the limitations as well, but I do want to make a disclaimer that I did not get to physically track with the resident engagement sheet her baseline. This is all reliant on staff reports prior, because by the time I found out she was moving, I had decided that she was going to be the person that I kind of switched and pivoted to, because the other resident that I was initially going to study, there was too many complications, too many variables happening with that, and so I had to pivot. And so by the time I decided, okay, I'm going to pivot and I'm going to follow this resident, she was already on her way to transition. So basically what the graph showed was weeks 1 through 2, there was low but measurable participation, beginning, and then a steady increase in weeks 3 through 4, and then 5 through 6, a constant attendance and sustained participation throughout the programs. And what I found was the verbal and cognitive domains showed the highest averages, actually, which was very interesting, because like I said, she was not engaging verbally with you if you didn't engage with her. But I was interested to know that the social wasn't as much, but I think also that will just come with time. The overall pattern seemed to reflect a gradual, increase in positive behaviors that we weren't getting at all. And so what this means for me, and I think for the agency in practice, is the low scores with her in the first weeks were, I think, just also readjustment, because there were some weeks that she didn't go to anything. And so there were a lot of zeros factored in for those days. But I think it was just the adjustment of being in a new environment and being around new people. I think the consistent staffing and routine really helped reduce the withdrawal kind of aspects of it. And I think that the Hearthstone model or the culture that they use with Bridgewater to inform how they structure the activities and everything. I think that helped a lot, and it highlights to me the importance of environment, especially when you have residents with mid to late stage dementia, maybe just going the extra mile to be able to support them and get them in an environment where they will thrive. And also showing to me that, like these things, they make a difference. I want to talk about the limitations and recommendations of my project. So the limitations were, well, number one, I told you before, I had to pivot. So I didn't get to track the residents' baseline in the same way that I got to track the engagement, and I really wish that I could have. Also, the data was not collected by me personally, it was collected by staff. So I couldn't really be up close and personal with it like I really wanted to. There could be inconsistencies depending on the staff perception. They're not a social worker, and I mean, they're experienced with dealing with residents with dementia, but also they're just approaching it from a different way. So there could have been that. And then I had a comment section on the tracking sheet that was never really filled in, even though I kind of asked for that. And also just it being a single case design. It was informative for this resident per se, which we really wanted to focus on, but it's not, I wouldn't be like, this is a generalizable, finding, or the results are generalizable. Recommendations that I would have for myself going forward is me personally tracking the activities or finding a way to do that. Whether I have to spend the next 6 weeks in Bridgewater, or beginning data collection before the transition would have been amazing. Providing staff with maybe clearer guidelines with completing the comment section and knowing what to say. And also probably seeing if this applied to multiple residents too. But Bridgewater, it's kind of like a flow by, like a fill in as needed. So as one resident transitions to a next level of care or passes away, another resident, so there might not be multiple residents at the same time experiencing a transition. Key takeaways that I learned and that I want you to also take away from this evaluation is that the resident engagement did show to steadily increase over time, which was very refreshing. I did like to see that, because it honestly could have gone either way. She could have continued to be social, because they don't force you to come to activities. After transitioning to Bridgewater, the structured person-centered programming provided to me seemed like a comfort and an encouraging daily activity participation, and that the evaluation seems to support the idea that with a consistent routine, familiar staff, individualized activity design, all things that the Hearthstone model promotes, it helps to contribute to the well-being of the individual with dementia, and it highlights the social work role in making sure that we're assessing and improving programs like this that can enhance the quality of life of older adults. I think this was really informative for my agency, and they mentioned using the resident tracking sheet that I made, or something similar to it in the future when they have individuals that transition, to track whether or not it's actually making a difference so that they can adjust accordingly. So I thought that was pretty cool. These are the references that I primarily used to help me compile this slideshow and do the background research for my evaluation. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it.